So if you have your Bibles, we're going to be in Mark, actually. All right, so we're going to be in Mark. We're in a series right now, and when we do these, Pastor Robin and I don't know if you call it cheating, but I get to use the same sermon twice. All right, and so I'm preaching down here, Mark, and then next week I'll be up in traditional preaching the same message, and Pastor Robin will be down here. And so we had to kind of pick which ones we wanted to do, and so she said, "Do you want to do Matthew?" And I was like, you know what? I could take a break from Matthew. And so Pastor Robin's handling Matthew, and I'm going to handle Mark. So if you have your Bibles, we're going to be in chapter 8 of Mark, starting at verse 27. It says this: Jesus went on with his disciples to the villages of Caesarea Philippi, and on the way, he asked his disciples a question. Someone say, on the way. On the way. So Mark's gospel, I just want to kind of set this up for us. Mark likes this phrase, on the way. And so what it does is it's kind of a trigger to look for formation. That for Jesus, formation happens on the way, right? That it's not just kind of classroom formation. I know the church kind of does, we do a lot of sit in circles, be in the classroom, or sit in pews or chairs and learn and do those things. For Jesus, when he's taking his disciples and going on the way, that's where he's forming them. That's where he's teaching him. And so it's a little bit more of an apprenticeship model. So I actually just a couple weeks ago, I got to quit my construction job, all right? So yeah, thanks. I was excited. But when I got into the trades, they have an apprenticeship program. And so, but the thing is, we do have a classroom, and we would go to a classroom like once a week for 4 years, this apprenticeship was. And, but really, we were also working alongside of master mechanics, right? So we're not just learning, the classroom is kind of a place that we could hone what we're learning while we go, right, on the way. And so I got infamous, I think it's infamous. We called it, they called it the 8-hour 90. Now, you don't need to know what a 90 is to understand that I can do it now in 15 minutes, okay? So this was like one of my first jobs, but here's the thing. So I got, I had to wear a harness, which is like, so you don't fall off the edge of something, right? And so I had to go 2 stories up in the air and clip off in this rack so that I wouldn't fall. But to work on this thing, I had to like reach out like this, right, over the edge and kind of get this thing to work. But what happened was I kept dropping it, right? I kept dropping it, but it takes 20 minutes to get down from where I am to redo it again. And then I got it on, and one of the mechanics go, "That does not look good enough. Do it again. Do it again." And so I literally, on a 12-hour day, I spent 8 hours doing this one thing, but that's apprenticeship, right? It was. Hey, you didn't. And this, when you see Jesus and you see Jesus working with the disciples, there's always this teaching. It's not like that. It's this. Watch how I do it. And then remember when Matthew, then he sends them off to figure it out and do some of those things. So that's kind of the apprenticeship model, the discipleship model that Jesus gives us here. Now there is a problem. On the way for Jesus is on the way to suffer in love for God's creation. So for the church, like we often form comfortable Christians. Like that's we oftentimes are forming people that are comfortable, it's safe, right? We're always praying for hedges of protection, right? Like all these types of things, right? But Jesus is moving towards hardship. Jesus is moving towards pain. And so when Jesus tells us in other places to take up your cross, I say this a lot, right? Take up your cross, it means, and follow him, it means to move toward the thing that calls you to lay down your life, right? That you have something that God is calling you to. There is some kind of pressure point, there is a pain, or there's someone in your world that, or even groups of people in your world that you are called to lay your life down for. And so what we'll find is that a lot of Christians could not articulate what they're moving toward, like what their calling is. Like, what is it that you're going to give your life to? Because that's what it means to pick up your cross and follow Jesus. Let's go back to the text. It says this in verse 27. Now let's look at the question at the end there. Jesus went with his disciples to the villages of Caesarea Philippi, and on the way he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that I am?" So again, this is a question that he's not asking in a classroom, right? Where is he? He's in Caesarea Philippi. Y'all know where that is? No, I didn't either. I had to look it up, right? So, come on. So Caesarea Philippi, it was named by Herod Philip, all right? Herod Philip, who was the son of Herod the Great, right? So Herod the Great, you know from the Christmas story, the one that sent the orders to kill all the children, right? So this city is named after the son of him and Caesar. So you have Caesarea, that's Caesar, and Philippi, that's Philip, okay? So this place, this is where empire is worshipped, right? This is where all kinds of false idols and different things are lifted up. Caesar is called son of the divine, right? And so he is worshipped here. And so this is not a Jewish place, right? This is not Jerusalem. This is not temple space. This is foreign territory, maybe enemy territory. And so this is the place where Jesus is saying this. So you can imagine if Jesus was walking through Washington, D.C. and stopped at the Capitol building. You have the flags kind of waving behind, and where all kinds of evil is kind of worshipped, if you've been paying attention to the news. But he says this, he asks this question in light of that. Who do people say that I am? And they answered him, John the Baptist, and others, Elijah, and still others, one of the prophets. So this is interesting because none of those are bad ideas, right? You can kind of imagine like the John one. You're like, didn't he die? Isn't he in prison? That doesn't work, right? But there's clearly a growing idea that Jesus is special. Right? Not just from outside of his disciples. There's clearly something happening with Jesus where they're going, there's something special happening. Like we don't know what it is necessarily, and that's what he's getting to. Who do people say that I am? And so standing in Caesarea Philippi, like those answers won't get you in trouble. Those are safe answers, right? Because there's no king, there's no Messiah, there's none of that. It's just, well, good teachers, and he's doing good things. So And here's the thing. It is so much easier to admire Jesus than it is to surrender to him. It is way easier just to say, oh, he's a good teacher, right? I like some of what's said. The Bible stuff is good. And I just go about your life living it as you're the Lord of it. It's way easier just to stand at a distance and admire. But Jesus doesn't seem content with those answers, right? Because he kind of turns the question back on them, right? In verse 29, he says, he asks them, but who do you say that I am? And so in a city where Caesar is called divine, Jesus kind of presses them. Jesus expects a different answer, and he gets it, right? Peter answered him, you're the Messiah. Now, I don't spend a lot of time in Mark's gospel, so I actually, there is no applause break by Jesus here with Peter. Because in Matthew 16, this is kind of where I know this story where he goes, oh, you are Peter, and on this rock, right, I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not overcome. Like that's how Matthew tells this story. Mark doesn't do any of that. There's no applause for Peter's announcement. And here's, I think, the reason. For Mark, the declaration of Messiah cannot be separated from the cross. There is no Messiah without the cross, and that's why Jesus follows up with his response. Not applause, but look what he says in verse 30. And he sternly ordered them not to tell anyone about him. What do you mean? You're the Messiah, right? We're supposed to tell everybody, aren't we? Aren't we supposed to be excited about this? But what we'll see shortly is that Peter has the right title, but doesn't have the cross. He's got the name right, he just doesn't know what it actually means. Because Messiah for them, and we've kind of covered this in Matthew a lot, Messiah for them was a Davidic king, right? It was someone from the line of David who would bring peace to Israel and lead them in overthrowing Roman occupation. Like, that's what they're waiting for. But saying that, if you said that in Caesarea Philippi, surrounded by government and all those things, if you start announcing, we have a king, that's a real fast way to get arrested, a real fast way to get killed. And so Jesus is going, this is not the time. We are not there yet, because you don't know yet what it means for me to be the Messiah. The Messiah cannot be announced until it's redefined. And that's what Jesus does next. He redefines what they understood as Savior. And that's in verse 31. Can I have my water, babe? Give me a little break. Thanks so much. Whew. All right, verse 31. Then he began to teach them that the Son of Man must undergo great suffering and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the scribes, and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. Bless you. Now, notice that Jesus doesn't mention Rome here, right? He doesn't mention Rome at all. He mentions the scribes, the priests, and the elders. And it's like, I think it's because we just kind of understand what empires do. Like, empires, they're consistent. They remove threats and they protect systems. That's kind of what governments do. So Jesus mentions the scribes and the elders because they're the ones who are supposed to see it, right? They're the ones that are supposed to get it. Like, this is who you've been waiting for, and you're missing it. Now, the danger here, the religious leaders, what they're doing seems faithful, right? They're not cartoon villains, right? They're protecting tradition. They're trying to keep order. They're preserving their influence with Rome. Like, they're trying to survive, right? So it's out of kind of a good place. And I think this happens in churches, right? We become more concerned with protecting our favorite things about our church than we do about reaching people that aren't here yet. But hear me on this. This isn't our church. This isn't our church. I love that we have pride in this place and that we have pride for all the things that have happened over 150 years, but this is God's church, right? And so we have been entrusted with it, right? Like, that we have been given stewardship of this space, and so we can't be the type of people that like the servant with the denarius and the talents who hid the one coin because he was afraid, right? He was afraid of what would happen if he failed or if he lost it. And it's like, no, we're called to go and do things for this community, not protect what we've been or not protect the things that we love, but go find the people that God's in love with. You tracking? Okay. Let's go back to the text. Verse 32. He said all this quite openly, right? And so this is, so Jesus isn't using parables here, right? He's not speaking cryptically. He's not doing any of that. He is saying this as clear as day, right? And look at Peter's response. I love Peter. You gotta love Peter, okay? And Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. That's a bold move, Cotton, right? I mean, but this is so human, right? Isn't this human? Like Peter just had this revelatory moment where he's like, I know you're the Messiah, right? And it kind of immediately goes to his head. Like, immediately went to his head. But Jesus came here for if we all haven't done that, I've done that. Where I go, God, how about plan B? Right? How about plan B? I just, because your way really looks tough. This really looks difficult. I don't like where this is heading. What a safer route. Someone's already gone. A path's already been made. Let's go that way. That's in me. And so it's the human condition to avoid crosses in life. the human condition. Peter's just doing what humans do, right? Avoid hardships, avoid pain, avoid loss. And don't miss this, because this is much like the religious leaders. He's doing it out of love, right? He's doing it out of preservation. Jesus, this isn't good. We don't want you to die. This is how we're wired. We're wired to preserve. We're wired to be safe. And so we see that in Jesus' response. Because look at verse 33. But turning and looking at his disciples, he rebuked Peter. Now notice, he rebuked Peter, but he's looking at everybody, right? So he's talking to everyone. He says, yes, Peter's named, but he's looking at all of them. Why? Because Peter's instinct is contagious, right? Because when Peter, because imagine they're all thinking it, right? When Jesus goes, like, yeah, I'm going to die, and they're all going, what? And so Peter steps out and says something like, thank God, Peter said something, because I wanted to say the same thing. It is contagious to be safe and to keep this around. And then Jesus says this famous line, "Get behind me, Satan." That's a little rough. Like, easy, Jesus, That's what do we do with this? I think first we have to understand that when Peter urges Jesus to avoid suffering, he's in a way, he's echoing the same adversarial temptation that Jesus had with Satan in the wilderness, right? It's a path to victory without a cross. That's what Satan was offering him in the wilderness. That's in Mark 1, verse 12 and 13. And the Spirit immediately drove him, Jesus, out into the wilderness. He was in the wilderness 40 days, tested by Satan, and he was with the wild beasts, and the angels waited on him. So Mark doesn't Mark, if you read Mark's gospel, he's very to the point. Like, there's no extra anything, right? So you have to kind of go see Matt and these other guys that wrote about that temptation. But remember, it was basically this: are you hungry? Turn this rock into bread. Remember, right? Do you want the kingdoms of the world? Bow down and worship me. There's no need for a cross, right? That's the same temptation that Peter, and that's why he says, "Get behind me, Satan." It's an adversary. Satan means adversary, and so it's that which would keep Jesus from going to the cross. Anything that would keep Jesus from the cross would be of that same spirit. And he says this: "You are setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things." And so when Jesus says this, he's drawing a sharp contrast between two orientations. Human beings are about preservation, strength, control, and avoiding loss. Yeah? Divine things, however, are about obedience, surrender, redemptive suffering, and trust beyond visible outcomes. That's hard. Redemptive suffering and trust beyond visible outcomes. That's what we're called to. Those are the divine things, and that takes risk. And so Peter's thinking like a human, trying to protect, secure, and preserve. Jesus is thinking like the Father, moving toward costly love, trusting that faithfulness, not control, is the path to true victory. Now, we got to pivot to Mark 15. He just kind of laid all this out, what it's going to look like. And then in Mark 15, we actually see it happen. Jesus said the Son of Man must suffer, be rejected, and be killed. And so let's just pick up in Mark 15, verse 25. It was 9 o'clock in the morning when they crucified him. The inscription of the charge against him read, "The King of the Jews." Again, this is what empires does, right? They protect systems and power and eliminate threats to it. That's what Jesus was. He was a threat to power. And with him, they crucified two rebels, one on his right and one on his left. I keep breaking this pulpit. Sorry. Those who passed by derided him, shaking their head and saying, "Aha, you who would destroy the temple and build it in 3 days, save yourself and come down from the cross." And now look who enters the scene in the next section. They're the same people that Jesus mentioned in chapter 8. So in the same way, the chief priests, along with the scribes, right there they are, were also mocking him. and among themselves and saying, he saved others, he cannot save himself? Let the Messiah, the King of Israel, come down from the cross now, so that we may see and believe. Those who were crucified with him also taunted him. Verse 33, when it was noon, darkness came over the whole land until 3 p.m. At 3 o'clock, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, which means, my God, why have you forsaken me? When some of the bystanders heard it, they said, listen, he's calling for Elijah. There's Elijah. And someone ran, filled a sponge with sour wine, put it on a stick, and gave it to him to drink, saying, wait, let us see whether Elijah will come and take him down. So, even on the cross, people were looking for a plan B. Elijah represents power in the Jewish community. He's one of my favorite Old Testament characters. When he's arguing with Ahab, there's this. They're doing this kind of. It's called a worship contest to some degree. But ultimately, Elijah calls down fire onto a mountain, right? And the fire swoops up and kind of destroys everything in its wake. So they're kind of like that's who he represents. So when they're saying Elijah, they're like, hey, God, come in power, right? Save us in a mighty way. Do something miraculous right now because this is not good. We need your plan B. This is not going well. So at Caesarea Philippi, they thought he might be Elijah. At Golgotha, they hoped Elijah would save him. But the Messiah did not come to call fire down. Jesus came to absorb it, to absorb wrath, to absorb the pain, to absorb the destruction. And so in verse 37 it says, then Jesus gave a loud cry and breathed his last. And the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. Now when the centurion who stood facing him saw that in this way he breathed his last, he said, truly, this man was God's son. Jesus stays on the cross because he did not come to destroy his enemies. He came to endure them. He did not come to prove power through spectacle. He revealed power through surrender. And that's what makes the cross so hard to accept, right? That because even at the moment of execution, the human instinct is still, there has to be another way. There has to be another way. There has to be a reversal. There has to be a rescue. There has to be a dramatic victory. But resurrection will not be a rescue from the cross. It will be vindication through the cross. That's the difference. You don't get to get by without the cross. And so we have this table. There's no spectacle here. There's no fire from heaven. Just bread from broken hands and a cup poured out in love. Communion is not about avoiding suffering. It's about participating in redemptive love. When we receive this bread and this cup, we're not asking for plan B. We're saying yes to the way of Jesus. Obedience over control. Surrender over preservation. Trust beyond outcome. This is his body given. This is his blood poured out. And we receive it. We follow him behind the cross.